أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين وبعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, that we are going to test you. بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ, from something of fear and hunger, وَنَقْص, and deficiency, or a loss of wealth, of food, of life. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, and give glad tidings to those who are patient. الصابرين. And in this verse, we can give a summary of this life, ad-dunya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us a summary of this life, ad-dunya. That the dunya is darul ibtila, darul balwa. This dunya is a place of trial and tribulation and test. And the difference between us in this dunya is based upon our sabr. And of course, we're going to see in verses to come, sabr with iman. But sabr, the difference between the one who is successful and the one who is unsuccessful. And this verse can be applied to anything in life. The difference between the one who is successful and the one who is unsuccessful is sabr or lack of sabr. The one who is successful in his marriage, it's due to patience, sabr. The one who is successful in his workplace, it's due to patience, sabr. The one who is successful in martial arts, sabr, patience. In art, sabr, patience. In writing, in education, the difference between the one who is successful and the one who is unsuccessful is sabr. Without sabr, you cannot achieve anything in this life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُم مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Those who went afflicted with a calamity in this life, they say, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ. To Allah we belong. وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. And to Him we will return. What is this life except a moment? And shortly we're going to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anyway. Inna lillah. We belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He does with us what He wants. He gives us what He wants. He takes from us what He wants. For some, He determines poverty. For others, He determines wealth. For some, He determines health. For others, sickness. Inna lillah. We belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And based upon the way that we interact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qadr, we will be judged when we return back to Him. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. The ayah that precedes this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, O you who believe, اسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek aid, seek your awn, depend upon two things. For what? For your time in this life. Depend upon two things. Ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. Patience and prayer. Patience and prayer. And some of the ulama, they say that this part here, as-sabr was-salah, the sabr here, actually is referring to that which gives you sabr, which is as-siyam. As-siyam, fasting, which we spoke about during Ramadan. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us when ordaining for us as-siyam, the fasting of the Shahru Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may acquire taqwa. And the core ingredient for taqwa is what? Sabr, patience. Without sabr, there is no taqwa, which we will come to see shortly, inshaAllah. Without sabr, there is no taqwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to seek our aid in as-salah, connection to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, silatun bayna al-abdi wal-rabb, and as-sabr. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, a part of the Quran, portion of the Quran, which I am sure most of us, if not all of us, we know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and perhaps we recite it in our prayers daily. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says what? Wal-asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an oath by time. Al-asr. And al-asr is ajib. It runs away from us. Wal-asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Man is at a loss. Man is at a loss. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Except for those who have core ingredients. Number one, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. They have iman. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And because they have iman, they have righteous actions. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. And they call others to good. They remind each other of the good. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They have patience and they call to patience. They are patient upon the trials and tribulations of this life. The trials and tribulations that come with the amana that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us as mu'minun, leaders of humanity with our iman. They are patient. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اصْبِرُوا وَصَابِرُوا وَرَابِطُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He calls us to sabr. O you who believe, have patience. اصْبِرُوا وَصَابِرُوا. And force yourself upon patience. Not only have patience, but tie yourself down to patience during times wherein you don't feel like you can be patient. اصْبِرُوا وَصَابِرُوا. Force yourself to be patient. وَرَابِطُوا. Ribat is to guard the borderlines. Ribat, the Prophet ﷺ, he referred to waiting between the salawat as ribat in the masjid. And ribat is what a platoon will do when they are guarding the borders, when they are positioned on the borders of a nation or the borders of a state or an empire or a khilafah, whichever one you would like to choose. That's ribat. And of course, ribat, be on guard, be on point, be aware of your enemies, shaitan, yourself. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. And have taqwa. Have taqwa. And taqwa, as we said, requires patience. Why? We're going to see inshaAllah. And taqwa, the ulama, they say, wiqaya. Wiqaya. It's a shield from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's perhaps a simple explanation. Real taqwa is to develop consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of our actions, in all of our situations, in all of our affairs. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So that perhaps you may be from the people of falah. And al-muflih is the one who has falah in the next life. The next life, as well as this life. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in multiple places in the Quran describes the people of iman as people of falah. People of falah, multiple times. And falah is basically the best of this life and the best of the next life. And I will ask a rhetorical question, one that you can answer to yourself. Have you ever seen a righteous person who is poor? Definitely you have. Have you seen a righteous person who is sick? Definitely you have. Many of the great ulama and awliya of the past were poor. Many of them had health conditions. Our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, Sayyidul Bashar and Sayyidul Anbiya, the master and leader of mankind and the prophets, he died in a state of poverty, alayhi salatu wasalam. So how is it then that the people of taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that you can have the best of this life and the next? How? The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam passed away and he didn't have anything. In fact, he had a debt. Likewise, some of the salihun and the awliya, many of them passed away, they had nothing. So how is it that they can be people of the best? They have the best in this life and the best in the next. Because many will say, the best of this life, if you ask them, is material. Good health, good wealth, nice house, nice car, status, fame perhaps. And that's because we've misunderstood this life. And we're looking for the best of this life in the wrong places. If you're looking for good in places of wickedness, you will never find it. And we, due to the consumeristic society that we live in, the capitalist society that we live in, we have been conditioned and we assume and we search for happiness in the material. Not realizing sometimes that material never brings happiness. Never brings happiness. The best of this life is when a person is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the best of this life. The best of this life is in the shade of Ar-Rahman. That's the best of this life. Regardless whether poor, sick, hungry, full, healthy, male, female, old, young, the best of this life is when in the servitude of Ar-Rahman. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that perhaps you may find falah. The best of this life and the next life comes through what? Through sabr in this life, taqwa, iman, ribat, tying ourselves to the masajid, tying ourselves to the places of good, tying ourselves down and preventing ourselves from that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want to see from us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through His Prophet alayhi salatu salam, informed us. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, "As-sadaqatu nurun was-sabru diya." That sadaqah is a light, but sabr is a ray, a beam of light. As-sadaqatu nur. Charity is a light. And a nur, for example, a light bulb, you would refer to it as nur. But the light that comes from the sun, you refer to it as diya. It's a ray. And the light that comes from the sun, yes, it brings benefit, but it's also hot. It's also hot. And when you think about patience, patience is beneficial. But whilst you are struggling and striving and being patient, there is sometimes a burn. There is a burn. To say no to your desires and be patient, sometimes you will feel the burn, the pain of saying no. Likewise, to be patient upon the salah, sometimes there is a burn. Perhaps I'm tired. Perhaps I'm stressed, and so on and so forth. But I force myself to go to the masjid. I force myself to pray. And if we look to the life of the Prophet ﷺ, we find the embodiment of a statement the Prophet ﷺ, he said to us. He said, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ. Know that victory comes with patience. And we said earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. That victory in this life comes through sabr. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, know that victory comes through sabr. And if we look to the Prophet ﷺ's life, the Prophet ﷺ was an embodiment of sabr. The Prophet ﷺ came from a noble family. The Prophet ﷺ was lined up to be from the heads of Quraysh prior to revelation. It was assumed that he would take the helm of Quraysh and he would be at the forefront of Quraysh. His grandfather was a noble leader of Quraysh. His father was considered a noble man amongst Quraysh. By lineage, he was known. And by khuluq, character, his trust, his truthfulness, his sincerity, his helping of the needy, and so on and so forth. The Prophet ﷺ had everything within the society that he lived in, Quraysh and Mecca. And all of it was taken away from him when he received revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and began to call his people to the truth. Those closest to him rejected him. His own family members abandoned him, slandered him, abused him, kicked him out of his homeland. He was pelted. He was warned against. He saw his companions killed. He saw his family members harmed. But not once do we read that the Prophet ﷺ complained. Not once. In fact, we see the opposite. In Ta'if, when he was pelted out of Ta'if, he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, as long as you're pleased with me, I don't care what happens to me. He accepted that this is the path. And prior to passing away, the Prophet ﷺ had conquered Mecca. The companions, upon his death, conquered Persia, conquered Rome, conquered North Africa, spread out into the Southeast Asian region, the subcontinent. A few hundred years later, they reached Europe. وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ. Know that victory comes with patience. When Quraysh was in front of them. And the pagan Arab tribes had allied themselves with Quraysh. And the treacherous tribes of the Yahud of Medina were behind them. And they were digging the trench. And the Sahaba could not see where victory was going to come from. The Prophet ﷺ in that moment informed them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had allowed him to see that they would enter into Persia and enter into Rome. Whilst they're besieged, they're scared, they're worrying for their family members behind them and their lives in front of them. وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ. But there are conditions that the qawa'id, the principles given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are followed. In tansurullaha yansurkum. If you give victory to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will give victory to you. That's what Allah tells us in the Quran. If you give victory to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will give victory to you. What does that mean? That means following the God-given framework that we have in the Quran and the way of the Prophet ﷺ, as formulated for us by the 4 schools of fiqh in all areas of our lives. And if we look into our homes, sometimes we can identify where the calamity has come from. I disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, this is the consequence. I disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, this is the consequence. And if we look at history, we can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us victory throughout our history. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used us to bring guidance to humanity throughout history whenever we as a collective have followed the framework of Islam. And when we have distanced ourselves from that framework, that's when we've suffered and we faced losses and calamity and destruction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us qawa'id, universal principles. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed us. Sabr is from the core ingredients in our individual lives and in our collective lives. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. What's the relevance of speaking about sabr? What's the relevance to our current situation? It's relevant in all aspects of our lives. But there is a particular aspect that is potentially going to afflict, or not afflict, but touch all of us, which was alluded to a few weeks ago in relation to gas price hikes, cost of living hikes, loss of jobs, issues with healthcare, and so on and so forth. We, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, as Muslims in Europe and in the Western world, and in many parts of the Muslim world, have been living in relevant ease. We turn our taps on and water flows. We open our fridges and we have an abundance of food. If we don't, we take a 5-minute walk to a shop and we can buy fruits from every continent of the globe. We can select from clothing types of materials that were unheard of prior to our time. New materials being invented. We can buy clothes from China, Africa, Asia, Europe, just by taking a 5-minute walk. We can click on a button and we have things delivered to our homes. We no longer have to leave our houses. We no longer have to move from our seats. Food comes to us. We have the latest technology available to us. We have the latest cars, the latest planes. We can travel in 2 or 3, 4, 5 hours, a journey which would have taken months a few centuries ago. When it's cold, we flick a switch and we're warm. When it's hot, we flick a switch and we're cool. We have been living in relevant ease for a long time, And perhaps we are going to face some difficulty, perhaps. And so we have to remind ourselves the one who blessed us with all of those blessings is the same one who afflicts us with any affliction that we face. And so as we were blessed with the blessings, we are being afflicted with the afflictions by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if we were from the grateful, if we were from the shakireen, now it's time to be from the sabireen. And if we were not from the shakireen, now it's time to be from the tawwabeen, and to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognize, I was blind to the blessings that I had. Forgive me, Ya Rabb. Now that I'm starting to feel perhaps some anxiety, now that I'm starting to feel perhaps some fear for what is ahead, it's time to remind myself of the blessings that I had that I was previously blinded to. One of the biggest problems that we have in Europe and in the Western world, as Muslims and non-Muslims, is that we are ungrateful. We are an ungrateful people. And that's the reality. There's no need to sugarcoat it. We are an ungrateful people. We complain about the slightest of things. We complain because our food has no salt. We complain because our food is not warm enough. We complain because we're eating the same type of food more than once in a week, not realizing how many people don't have food to eat in the first place. We feel sorry for ourselves because we can't afford the latest gadgets, not realizing that some people will be happy with one gadget for their entire lifetime. We complain because our internet is too slow, not realizing how many parts of the world don't have internet access, full stop. We complain about the education system, not realizing that some children have to walk for miles to receive an education. We complain about the water services, forgetting that there are some who have to walk miles for polluted water. We are an ungrateful people as a collective. And I'm not talking about individuals. As individuals, I'm sure there are some here that are more grateful than most. But as a collective, as a people, we are ungrateful. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ فَإِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. If you are grateful, I will increase you in blessings. And if you, وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ, and the kufr here is not disbelief, it's denial. Kufr is denial. وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, if you deny what? The bounties given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what? His adhab is shadid. His punishment is severe. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us the example of a town that had peace, prosperity, an influx of food, water flowing, and they were ungrateful for Allah, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turned it upon them. And if you look to Qawm Fir'aun, to Qawm Lut, to Qawm Ad, if you look to all of the nations, Qawm Nuh, Quraysh, you look to the nations that were destroyed before us, they were destroyed ultimately because of a lack of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them prophets, Allah sent them reminders, Allah told them to worship Him, the one who gave them everything they had. They refused, they denied Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them. And we will face the same destruction if we do not change our ways as a collective and try to be from the grateful. And during this time now, when we face calamity, to be from the people of patience. And I will conclude by mentioning the ulama, they say sabr is of three types. And we have to remember this. If we walk away from this khutbah and we don't remember anything except this last bit, alhamdulillah, sabr is on three things. As-sabru anil ma'asi, patience in staying away from sin. When I want to sin, I have to be patient enough to say no to myself. Was-sabru ala ta'at, and patience upon worship. When I don't want to pray, I have to be patient upon prayer. And the last one, which is the relevant one to us currently right now, as-sabru ala al-qadr, to be patient upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees. As is attributed to Khalid ibn al-Walid, radiallahu ta'ala, he said, if I woke up tomorrow with one of my limbs missing, I would say Alhamdulillah. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed it for me, so it's better for me. Patience upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. Knowing that with patience, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees for us is the best for us. If I don't get the job, it was never good for me. If I get the job, it's good for me. If I don't get married, it was never good for me. If I get married, it's good for me. If I face a test in my marriage, it's what was written and it's good for me. And if we can develop that mindset, then we will start to find a contentment in this life. And that contentment is what we're chasing after, but we call it happiness. When we develop a contentment with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, in richness, in poverty, in health, in sickness, and so on and so forth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the shakirin and the sabirin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to follow our Prophet alayhi salam in being those who give guidance to mankind and humanity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and overlook our sins. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidu Majid. Warda Allahumma an Abi Bakr wa an Umar wa an Uthman wa an Ali. Allahumma ja'alna min as-sabirin al-shakirin laka ya Rabbal Alameen. اللهم اجعلنا من المخلصين المخلصين. اللهم تب علينا واعف عنا وتقبل منا عبادتنا إنك أنت مجيب الدعوات وأقم الصلاة.